They were 12 men who once walked with God himself. They saw the blind see the leper healed and death itself undone. But what became of them? When the miracles stopped, the world remembers their faith, but forgets their pain. Their footsteps vanished into deserts, prisons, and blood-soaked earth. Empires tried to erase them. Time tried to bury them. Yet their story still bleeds beneath the stones of history, waiting to be unearthed. For centuries, their endings have been whispered in fragments, in catacombs, in forbidden manuscripts, in the echoes of dying prayers. The church remembers their glory. Few dare to remember their suffering. 12 chosen men, 12 broken bodies, 12 flames that refused to die. They were fishermen, tax collectors, rebels, men like you, like me, transformed by a voice that called them from the nets of the world into the fire of eternity. And when that fire consumed them, the faith they carried became the foundation of heaven's kingdom on earth. Some were crucified. Some were torn apart. Some vanished into the dust of forgotten empires. But each left behind a trail of light carved through darkness, defying every sword that sought to silence it. So, we follow that trail. We will walk the road where saints became legends and where legends became martyrs. Their deaths were not the end. They were the beginning of a revolution that even death could not stop. Because sometimes the price of truth is blood, and the road to heaven is paved with those who refused to turn back. Now open your heart. The story of the 12 begins again. Peter and Andrew, the rock and the pathfinder. They were brothers of the seamen whose hands were roughened by salt and storms, whose eyes had watched the endless horizon for a sign of hope. Then one morning on the shores of Galilee, hope itself stood before them and said only 2 words that would change eternity: "Follow me." Peter and Andrew did not know where the path would lead. They left behind nets, boats, and certainty, stepping into a future written in heaven's ink, but sealed with their blood. From that moment, they were no longer fishermen of fish, but of souls. Peter, once called Simon, was impulsive, fiery, and unpolished, a man of thunder and heart. When others hesitated, he leapt. When others doubted, he declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." For this he was named the Rock. But even rocks can crack under pressure. When the night came and the Master was taken, Peter's courage collapsed beneath the weight of fear. 3 times he denied him, and when the rooster crowed, the sound pierced through the silence of history. That moment broke him, but in breaking, he was remade. His tears were not shame, they were baptism. In that collapse, the coward became the cornerstone. Years later, Rome burned under Nero's madness. Christians were hunted, crucified, and torn by beasts. In the chaos, Peter, now gray and weary, was captured. They demanded he renounce the name of Jesus. He did not. And when they condemned him to death, he made a single request: "Crucify me upside down, for I am not worthy to die as my Lord did." And so it was. The cross was inverted, heaven below, earth above. The world itself seemed to turn upside down as the first shepherd of the church gave his final sermon without words. Every drop of blood that fell from that cross became a seed, and from those seeds, the church began to bloom across empires. But faith did not die with Peter. Far away in the windswept port of Patras, his brother Andrew was facing his own cross. The Romans tied him, not nailed him to an X-shaped cross, so that his suffering would last longer. Yet even as pain surged through his body, he smiled. For 2 days he preached from that cross to the soldiers, to the townspeople, to the sky itself. The sea roared behind him, lightning cracked above the city, but his voice, soft and clear, rose like prayer. He spoke not of fear, but of joy. He said that the cross was not a punishment, but a gate, the same gate through which his Master once passed. 2 brothers, 2 destinies, one hung downward in humility, one faced outward in defiance. One surrendered to grace, the other embraced it with peace. Together they became the first pillars of a kingdom that could not be destroyed. Their bodies fell, but their voices did not. Through centuries, they still whisper across the waters, "Faith is not measured by strength, but by surrender." Think of Peter's trembling hands, Andrew's steady gaze. Think of what they saw, not with their eyes, but with their souls. If this story moves, you let it echo. Share it not for fame, but for remembrance. For courage is contagious, and faith still breathes in those who dare to believe. And as one cross fades into the next, our journey continues toward thunder revelation and the sons who would change the world. James the Greater and John, sons of thunder and the voice of revelation. They were called the sons of thunder, James and John, sons of Zebedee, brothers, whose tempers burned like lightning, whose faith roared like the storm. They had seen miracles with their own eyes, heard secrets whispered only on the mountain of transfiguration, and vowed to drink the same cup of suffering their master once drank. But they did not yet understand what that cup would cost. James the elder was a man of action, unyielding and bold. He once asked Jesus for fire to descend from heaven and consume those who rejected the truth. But years later, it was not heavenly fire, he called it. Was his own blood that would burn as the first flame of martyrdom. It was the year 44 AD. The streets of Jerusalem were trembling under the shadow of King Herod Agrippa I. The followers of the Way, as early Christians were called, had become a threat to the fragile balance of power. Herod, desperate to please the priests and to silence this rising faith, seized James. There was no trial, no defense, no last words allowed. Only the hiss of a drawn blade and the echo of thunder rolling over Zion's hills. In that single moment, James became the first apostle to die for the name of Christ, his blood staining the stones of Jerusalem, his death striking fear into the hearts of the faithful and fury into the heart of his brother. The one who had once sought power found glory in surrender. The one who had demanded thrones discovered a kingdom built through sacrifice. John the Younger witnessed it all, and something inside him changed forever. The fiery disciple became the apostle of love. He alone stood beneath the cross when the others fled, and it was to him that Jesus entrusted his mother, "Behold your mother." From that hour, John became her guardian, and in her quiet presence, he learned the sacred art of endurance. Years later, the empire would come for him too. But death would not claim him. Poison failed. Torture broke upon him like waves on rock. So the authorities cast him into exile onto the desolate island of Patmos, surrounded by the endless roar of the sea. There, in the silence of isolation, heaven opened. John saw visions, beasts rising from the deep, a woman clothed with the sun angels crying out with voices of thunder. He saw Babylon fall, the dead rise, and a city descending from the heavens, a new Jerusalem where tears would exist no more. The fisherman of Galilee became the prophet of the apocalypse. One brother silenced by the sword, the other speaking with the voice of eternity. One ended in blood, the other in revelation. Together they formed a paradox of faith, love, and wrath, death and vision, the storm and the calm that follows it. And so the sons of thunder faded from the world, one through sacrifice, one through prophecy, yet their echo still trembles in every heart that dares to believe. But the storm was not over. Beyond the mountains of Asia Minor, two other men would rise to carry the word across borders to the edge of the known world and to pay a price the world could scarcely imagine. Their names were Philip and Bartholomew, and their story is carved in blood and light. Philip and Bartholomew, the missionaries beyond the map. They were men who walked beyond the edges of the known world, carrying words that kingdoms could not contain and light that no empire could extinguish. Philip and Bartholomew, the questioner and the skeptic, were bound not by land, but by conviction. Philip was a thinker, one who sought to understand before he spoke. He was among the first to bring strangers to meet the Savior. It was he who led Nathanael to Christ. And when Jesus spoke of the grain of wheat that must die to bear fruit, Philip listened and understood. He would live that parable with his own flesh. After the resurrection, Philip became a wanderer of nations. He journeyed through Phrygia and Asia Minor, teaching that salvation was not chained to any race or throne. His voice challenged the gods of marble and gold. In Hierapolis, a city of serpents and superstition, he cast down the idols of their cults, and the priests rose against him. One night, torches flared and fists pounded the doors. They dragged him through the streets past the stone temples and into the square. They tied him upside down by his ankles, beating him until his body was torn and trembling. and yet through the agony he preached. "Do not interrupt my union with the Lord," he whispered, as his blood soaked the dust. Even death feared to silence him. As the crowd watched, a tremor passed through Hierapolis, a violent shaking that split the ground near the altar. Those who mocked him fell to their knees terrified. Many who had come to curse him left baptized in tears. The heretic became the seed of their faith. Bartholomew, also called Nathanael, was different. When he first met Jesus, he had doubted, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" But once he saw the truth, he never doubted again. His mind was sharp, his spirit unbreakable. He journeyed farther than any of them, through the scorching sands of Arabia, the palaces of Persia, and the jungles of India. In Armenia, he faced the last trial. The local king, enraged that his queen had embraced the faith, ordered Bartholomew to be tortured. They stripped him of his skin, every layer of flesh torn away, but his voice did not scream. He prayed for his executioners. Even in agony, he blessed them. The man once known for doubt died with absolute faith. His skin removed, yet his spirit untouched. The pagans stood in silence, for they had killed a man but witnessed a saint. Their blood soaked the edges of empires. Their courage drew the first true map of the gospel, a map written not in ink, but in sacrifice. Close your eyes for a breath. Imagine preaching with no fear in a land where no one knows your name. Write your thoughts not as comments, but as echoes of faith, for this is how stories survive when hearts carry them onward. But faith's journey did not end in Phrygia or Armenia. In another land, two others would rise, one a collector of coins, the other a seeker of proof whose paths from doubt to devotion would forge a legacy no empire could erase. Matthew and Thomas, from doubt to devotion. Matthew and Thomas, two men divided by doubt, united by destiny. One sought redemption from greed, the other sought truth through reason. Yet both would find themselves transformed by the fire of faith. Matthew had been a tax collector, a man despised by his own people. To his countrymen, he was a traitor, a servant of Rome who sold out his brothers for silver. But one moment changed everything. A single glance from Jesus, steady, uncondemning, filled with grace, pierced through the walls of guilt that chained his soul. "Follow me," the voice said, and the man who counted coins began to count miracles. He became the scribe of salvation, penning the gospel that revealed the Messiah to the Jews. His words were precise, deliberate, every sentence anchored in prophecy, every line connecting heaven to earth. But Matthew was more than a writer. He was a man reborn. He had traded the table of taxes for the table of truth. Years later, in the sun-scorched land of Ethiopia, Matthew's pen was replaced by a sword, not his own, but that of his persecutors. He had defied a local king, preaching that idols carved from wood and stone held no power. Soldiers stormed the sanctuary where he prayed, demanding he renounce his faith. But Matthew did not flee. He continued to preach, his voice calm amid the chaos. "Forgive them," he whispered, "they know not what they do." When the blade fell, legend says light burst from his body, a brilliance so intense that the executioners fled in terror. His death was not darkness, but illumination. The sinner had become a saint, and his final breath was a sermon that no sword could silence. Thomas the twin walked another path. Where Matthew saw and believed, Thomas questioned and wrestled. When he heard that the Master had risen, he refused to accept it. "Unless I touch his wounds," he said, "I will not believe." His doubt was not rebellion, it was a search for truth deeper than sight. And when the risen Christ appeared before him, inviting him to touch the marks of the nails, Thomas fell to his knees and cried out, "My Lord and my God." In that instant, the skeptic became the confessor. He carried that faith eastward through Parthia, Persia, and into the lands of India. There he built churches, healed the sick, and baptized kings. But his voice of truth provoked the powerful. At Mylapore, near modern Chennai, he was pierced by spears, 6 of them, his blood watering the soil of a distant land that still bears his name. From greed to grace, from doubt to devotion, Matthew and Thomas remind us faith is not born perfect, it is perfected through the fires of trial. And as one gospel closed and another faith was sealed in blood, the story of the apostles pressed onward toward Jerusalem once more, where justice, hope, and transformation awaited in the shadows of the temple. James the Lesser, Jude Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, Justice Hope and the Transformed Heart. In the heart of Jerusalem, where faith and fury collided, James the Lesser stood as a living bridge between heaven and earth. Known as James the Just, he was the leader of the early church, a man so devoted to prayer that his knees had grown calloused like the hide of a camel. His words were few, but his silence spoke of strength. In a city divided by religion and empire, he preached unity, that faith without works is dead and that mercy triumphs over judgment. When the high priests demanded that he deny Christ before the crowds gathered at the temple, James ascended the pinnacle, not to renounce, but to proclaim. "The Son of Man sits at the right hand of God," he declared. The mob erupted, stones hurled through the air. He fell from the wall, his body broken upon the sacred stones of Zion. Yet even as blood filled his mouth, he prayed, "Father, forgive them." A blow from a club silenced him, but the echo of his prayer never ceased. Justice died that day in Jerusalem, but his forgiveness birthed a faith no sword could crush. Far to the east, Jude Thaddeus, cousin of Jesus, apostle of the impossible, carried the message to Mesopotamia and Persia. He preached in lands ruled by kings who worshipped fire and idols. Many laughed, others believed. His words healed the sick and freed the tormented, and so the rulers turned against him. Beaten to death with clubs and axes, he fell beside the very altar where he had preached. But his name did not fade. Across centuries, those in despair would whisper it, "St. Jude, the patron of lost causes, the voice for the hopeless." Hope was not destroyed. It was multiplied through suffering, and beside him stood Simon the Zealot, once a revolutionary, now a man of peace. He had fought once for Israel's freedom with blades and blood, but after meeting Christ, he found a greater revolution, one fought not with steel, but with spirit. Together with Jude, he journeyed through Persia, proclaiming a kingdom that no empire could conquer. Tradition says they died side by side, one crucified. The other sawn apart two men who had once sought earthly liberation, now liberated by heaven itself. A zealot transformed into a servant, a martyr's blood mingled with his brother's tears. Together they proved that peace is not weakness, but divine power under control. The apostles were gone, 12 lives extinguished, 12 flames ascending into eternity. Yet from their ashes rose a fire that still burns. Their justice, their hope, their surrender became the foundation of a kingdom unshaken by time. Their story ends here, but the faith they carried, that flame of the impossible, still waits to be rekindled in every soul that dares to believe.